a beautiful day today, and it's a special day. We got a lot of great programs going on in Corinth today. I just got through texting Brother John Hall and also Captain John Hall. My apologies for not being able to be there. We had a couple scheduled at the same time, and I had made this commitment. Some weeks ago to President Ford. But it's a beautiful day outside. I don't know about y'all, two things. I'm looking forward to warm weather, and I'm looking forward to Tuesday night when I sign the contract with a group out of Kansas that's going to get to Corinth in about 4 weeks. The debris gone from it. I know those of you that have had logs out in front of your home for some weeks is going to be glad also. This has been one of the worst situations that I've been in since I've been in Corinth. But it's going to be good. We probably will have Corinth cleaned up in 4 to 5 weeks. We'll be back to the good old days, hopefully, on the streets. It would take our group probably a year and a half to get it done. Anyway, that's not what we're here today. This is a day, a great program about history, and I'm looking forward to it. As I look out at the audience, I walked in and I said, wow, we must be having Nicky Gilly here today. It's a great crowd, and I just want to say welcome. I understand we got some people from Jackson all over the state, and that's just absolutely great. Welcome to Corinth. This is one of the great places. If you're looking for a place to live, Corinth, put it on your map, because I guarantee this is a wonderful place. God bless you. Thank you. Have a great day.
My name is Jeffrey Powell. I'm an instructional technology specialist at Northeast Mississippi Community College.
And I'm Carla Faulkner, a recently retired history instructor from Northeast Mississippi Community College. And we want to join Mayor Irwin in welcoming you and thank you for choosing to spend your Saturday afternoon celebrating this incredible episode in Black history. The highlight of our program today will be a preview of an augmented reality app which will be released next month. The app tells the story of thousands of enslaved African Americans who found their first taste of freedom at Corinth during the Civil War. In 2016, this app began as the brainchild of Jeffrey, so I'll let him tell you about it.
This app came about during 2015. We hosted a mobile learning conference here in Corinth, and we were actually out at the camp. And one of the things that I noticed was all these beautiful statues at this site, but there was no interpretation. So I got to thinking about it, and I was actually in Tennessee at Nashville at the Tennessee Board of Regents conference there in their think tank, and I was sitting around and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be neat to walk up to these statues and a video play? So I approached Carla Faulkner when I got back to campus, pitched her my idea, and she was enthusiastic about taking this on.
I had first become interested in the Corinth Contraband Camp when the National Park Service hosted a symposium here in this place in 2014. And it was at that time that I met Ashley Berry, who serves as the supervisory park ranger at Corinth Interpretive Center. So when Jeffrey pitched the idea to me, my response was to reach out to Ranger Berry. Ashley, would you please stand? This whole procedure. Luckily, Ashley was interested.
Yeah, she said that there might be some funding available for us to take on this project. Soon we met with the Corinth Area Visitors and Convention Bureau Executive Director Christy Burns, who shared her excitement with this vision as well. If any of Christy's board is here, would y'all please stand?
Your board or staff. We thank them for their support. The National Park Service and Northeast Mississippi Community College created a formal agreement along with our third partner, Corinth CVB, to make this project possible. but it could not have ever happened without the generous funding of several groups.
The National Park Service Lower Mississippi Delta Initiative. We are very happy to have here with us today Shiloh National Park Acting Superintendent Randy Martin. Will you please stand? Their expertise would not make this project successful.
The Mississippi Humanities Council, and we are pleased to have their Executive Director, Dr. Stuart Rockoff, here today. Stuart, will you please stand? Are there any council members here today? Yes, our speaker is a council member, and so we are very pleased to have her here today.
The Mississippi Hills National Heritage Area. If you're on that board, would you please stand?
A project this big requires the help and support of numerous people. We would like to recognize and formally thank a few of them today. And in the interest of time, you can just hold your applause to the end of this.
Anybody from Northeast Mississippi Community College, would y'all please stand, even retirees?
It's almost impossible to tell you about the amount of support we have received for this project on campus. Also, we want to recognize our elected officials. Any elected officials for the City of Corinth, please stand. For Alcorn County. And our state legislators and anyone else at the state level. We also, of course, want to thank our members of Congress who have supported this through funding.
The partners, we also would like to do a special thank you to Cindy Mathis of Corinth for being willing to direct today's program. Please join us in giving all these contributors a round of applause.
We hope you enjoyed today's program. We are so pleased that the young people from Alcorn Central High School Chorus are sharing their talents with us today. And following their music, Ranger Tom Parson will provide a brief history of the camp.
While the chorus is getting loaded, Thomas Parson, who has been with the National Park Service since 1989, is currently serving as Ranger with the Corinth Civil War Interpretive Center, a unit of Shiloh National Park. Many of you are familiar with his writings through local newspaper columns on Civil War, Corinth, or his Tom Tuesday, Stories of Shiloh on Facebook. In addition to Ranger Parsons, he is an author of the Bear Flag and Bay State in Civil War, the Californians of the 2nd Massachusetts Cavalry, several feature articles in Blue and Gray magazine, and worked for the Giants that campaign in Battle of Tupelo, Harrisburg, Mississippi, June and July 1864.
it burning.
I'm going to take just a few minutes and talk about the history of the contraband camp. I'm a little bit out of my element here because usually when I talk about the contraband camp, you're a little bit different audience. My audience is usually a little bit more fifth grade. We've been talking to fifth graders about the contraband camp for almost as long as the Corinth Civil War Interpretive Center has been around. In fact, all of these young people that were just here, they came through the camp as fifth graders. Before I really talk about the history, I got to talk about the term contraband, where that comes from. Early in the war, a Major General by the name of Benjamin Butler really commanded the Union garrison at Fort Monroe, Virginia. And very early in the war, slaves ran away from plantations around Hampton, Virginia, and they came hopefully for the protection of the Union Army. And too often, they were sent back to their masters, the Union Army still having to comply with the Fugitive Slave Act. Well, Benjamin Butler, he didn't like that in the least, and he kept those runaway slaves. He said that they were contraband of war, and he was allowed to keep them just as he would any other captured equipment from the enemy, for their labor helped the Confederate war effort. The term contraband stuck, and it actually became the official term with the United States government for a runaway slave. Now, the camp here, it officially begins the first week of November in 1862, but that doesn't mean that slaves started coming then. Actually, they began to come into Corinth May 30th of 1862 when the city fell to the Union and the Union occupation began. The difference was there was no organization for them. They were just on their own. Wherever they could find a place to live, whether it was an abandoned house, a barn, a shack, a hut, a tent, that was their new home. Things changed in the fall. The first week of November came a new commander to the Union garrison. His name was Grenville Dodge. And Grenville Dodge had seen the effects of runaway slaves coming into Union camps, and it wasn't good for anyone. And he didn't want to see the confusion and disorganization as he had seen in Tennessee. And he immediately appointed a young chaplain from the 66th Illinois by the name of James Alexander. Couldn't have picked a better guy. The guy was a brilliant organizer. About 2 weeks later, General Grant actually made this official by appointing another chaplain by the name of John Eaton to organize all the contraband camps in the Department of the Tennessee. And Corinth already had a 2-week jump on them. And like I said, Chaplain Alexander, he's just the right guy. He doesn't just herd all of these people into one area. He makes a community. One of the first things he acquires is a sawmill. And slaves that had the skills with carpentry, they began to cut down trees. And they made houses, real houses, wood siding or log cabins. They were laid out on a grid. All the houses were numbered. All the streets were named for Union generals. They policed the area every day. It was kept clean. It was healthy. Aside from the houses, there were some amazing buildings. There was a commissary that handed out rations, a church, a hospital, which was actually unknown in the slave world, and most especially a schoolhouse. Everyone was allowed to attend school. Kids would go during the day, adults at night. What made this more special was that it was still against the law in the state of Mississippi to teach a slave to read and write. And they learned by the hundreds. The population of the camp, it really varied. One fellow said it was as high as 6,000. I personally believe that's a little bit high. It probably averaged about 3,500. Pretty good sum when the pre-war population of Corinth was only 1,400. It was a huge community. It was placed over on Phillips Creek, the land of Mary Phillips. She had a quarter section, 640 acres, and the government borrowed that from her. And the camp was set up there, and not only is this a place to live and learn, it was a place to work and actually earn money. Adults earning money for the first time in their lives. Those with skills were given occupations in carpentry and masonry, blacksmithing, laundresses, seamstress. So many had only worked in the fields, but that became a source of money. 400 acres were put under the plow. 300 in cotton. All of that sold right back to the government when it was harvested. 100 acres were turned into a farm. At one point in 1863, a gentleman went through and made an assessment of what was in there. 29,000 sweet potato plants, 10,000 tomatoes, 10,000 cabbages, and the list goes on and on. Acres and acres of beans, peas, potatoes, corn. And those contrabands didn't eat any of it. Every bit of that was sold back to the government. Now, they had good rations of their own. The government supplied them with good old Army hardtack, as well as meat, but every one of them had their own little garden, kitchen garden, attached to the house. One of the people that was responsible for the success of the camp was a reverend by the name of Edward Pierce. He belonged to the American Missionary Association. He was brought down here to be a teacher. He recorded that this was the most thoroughly systemized, cleanest, and most healthy camp I have ever seen. You will find them at every hour of the daylight at their books. We cannot enter a cabin or tent, but there are from 1 to 3 with books. One evening at about 9:30, he's walking around a quiet camp, and there's a young lad reading by the light of a burning pile of pine chips, and he had been there for several hours. One of the provisions of the Emancipation Proclamation allowed for the enlistment of black troops. However, General Dodge, he didn't wait for permission with that either. Shortly after establishing the camp, he enlisted a company, and they were trained in all military matters, and they would provide security for the camp. Well, they provided the nucleus for a regiment, which was eventually, they were given permission to raise from Washington, D.C. And it allowed able-bodied men to serve in the United States Army. They were initially called the 1st Alabama Infantry of African Descent. Pretty long name. Eventually it would be renamed the 55th United States Colored Troops. An interesting aspect concerning the regiment here, and all the African American regiments raised in the Western Theater. Like the East, the commissioned officers were all white soldiers. They had experience, they were veterans from other regiments. But here in the West, the senior enlisted non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, they were all white soldiers as well, which made these really the first integrated troops ever in the United States Army. There was a ceremony here in town in May of 1863 when the regiment, the 1st Alabama, got their national colors, their battle flags. Their regimental commander was actually Chaplain Alexander. He was promoted to colonel in the United States Army. And downtown, across the street from the Veranda House, there was a wonderful ceremony where these flags were presented. And one of the speakers was a private by the name of Rufus Campbell, who only months earlier had been a slave. Now he was the color bearer, one of the most honored positions within the regiment. When he received the flag, he told the crowd, "Why, there's not much blood in a man anyhow, and if he's not willing to give it for the freedom of his children and friends, he does not deserve to be called a man." Shortly after that, he was followed by a young corporal by the name of Sullivan. He made a few jokes, he was a bit of a wag, but then he counseled to those troops around him the adherence to the Stars and Stripes which they received that day. Says he, "We today for the first time had given to us the stars, but many of us received the stripes before." The 1st Alabama, or 55th, would go on and actually excel on the field of battle at the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. Now, much of what we know about the contraband camp comes from an article written in 1974 by Professor Cam Walker. And really just yesterday, we got these new booklets. They've just been published. We've got it for sale in the lobby. And it's Cam Walker's article. All this material that for years and years was all we knew about the Corinth Contraband Camp. She kind of reintroduced it to the world, which had forgotten it. But as all historians know, material comes available after we publish. It continues to. And we've learned a lot more about the contraband camp. Almost every day we find something new. Most recently we've been reviewing pension records, widows' pension records, soldiers' pension records, and many of them give first-hand accounts of life here at the Corinth Contraband Camp. It was a wonderful place. It was far better than any other camp. It was considered a model camp. But all good things, they come to an end. And in December of 1864, the camp was disbanded. The reason was the United States Army was leaving Corinth. It was no longer the strategic stronghold it had once been. The soldiers, they were needed on other fields. The occupants of the contraband camp were not able to survive without the security of the United States Army. If they had tried to stay, the Confederates would have returned them to slavery. So they boarded trains down at the depot, which took them to Memphis, to 2 other camps, which were not nearly as organized, not nearly as wonderful as the camp here. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was a place for these first steps for freedom, for people that hadn't known it before. And when the camp was abandoned and left behind, they took a lot of things with them, things they had learned here about community and responsibility, and no one could ever take that away from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranger Parson, for that wonderful overview of the camp. And let me remind you that there is not only Cam Walker's article published in bound form out in the lobby, but 2 of the more recent scholarship about contraband experience in the United States. Now, next on our program, 2 of our music faculty of Northeast, Dr. Amy Langley and Dr. Ray Harris, will play from Bandana Sketches by Clarence Cameron White. And following their music, Dr. Alicia Williams McLeod, Professor of Humanities at Rusk College, will deliver our keynote address. Dr. McLeod is a native of Detroit, whose parents and grandparents were from Mississippi and Tennessee. While Dr. McLeod first came south to attend college, her adult life has been characterized by continued movement between north and south, a habit that has led her to her scholarly work on African American emancipation, the movement of thousands from farms and plantations to contraband camps. Dr. McLeod completed a PhD in English and Education at the University of Michigan in 1998. Before taking her current position at Rusk, she taught at St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, Stillman College in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Indiana University in South Bend. McLeod has been named Senior Associate Researcher at the New Bowery Collegium at the University of Chicago for the 2020-21 academic year. And there she will have the opportunity to further her work digitizing contraband camp records. This public scholarship promises to reacquaint thousands of Americans, black and white, with their ancestral past. Dr. McLeod served for several years on the board of the Mississippi Humanities Council, and last year joined the state board of the National Audubon Society. Please join me in first welcoming Dr. Langley and Dr. Harris, and then Dr. McLeod.
afternoon, Corinth. This has truly been a wonderful program, and I am deeply honored to have been invited to speak today. I would like to thank Dr. Carla Faulkner, the organizing committee. I'd also like to thank the City of Corinth, Mayor Irwin, and the community for coming out on a Saturday afternoon when you could have been doing other things. Thank you so much. In May, and again in July of 1864, 17-year-old Samuel Bennett, a fifer in Company K of the 63rd United States Colored Troops, was on detail moving Camp Shiloh, a contraband camp located in Memphis, to the site of Camp Holly Springs, also within the city. Camp Shiloh, named for the battle of 2 years prior at Shiloh Meeting House, had likely been in existence that long, for the camp is spoken of by Fountain Day, a member of the 59th Regiment, as part of a Southern Claims Commission case. Day, speaking on behalf of petitioner Leah Martin, an African-American mother and wife whose free husband had been robbed and murdered during the war for his property and horses, stated that he had seen Martin within the federal lines, that he had seen her in Camp Shiloh of the colored people. The Shiloh camp is spoken of too by others, for instance by abolitionist, Underground Railroad operative, and Quaker educator Laura Haviland of Michigan, who in her memoir, A Woman's Life Work, wrote that she worked between Camp Bethel and Camp Shiloh, the two in sight of each other. At Shiloh, she attended Sabbath service out of doors, led by a literate black man with nearly 100 soldiers in attendance. Then missionary from Iowa, Lucinda Humphrey Hay, spoke similarly of Camp Shiloh, where she carried on her Lincoln School. She referred to the camp as, quote unquote, a contraband village, a fitting place for her school, a simple slab house eventually fitted with windows, seats, and a blackboard. Chandra Manning, in her 2016 book, Troubled Refuge, makes no mention of Shiloh, though she includes it in a map of the Memphis camps. But this is no small omission, for the Memphis camps are the story after Corinth. Manning takes a view of the Corinth camp that has become common. In a chaotic theater of war, relative to freed people, the Corinth camp was indeed, beyond question, a model camp, replete with its own school, church, numbered houses, and gardens, guarded early on by blacks themselves. An experiment relatively short-lived, however. The question becomes, what would become of the people of the Corinth camp? Those who had lived in town, perhaps nearby the camp, those who had lived out in the county on farms and plantations, and the droves of blacks who, in Manning's words, fleeing slavery in northern Alabama, had followed black raiding troops back to Corinth. There can be little doubt that the Corinth camp was exemplary, and as such, a model for other camps. What has been missed, however, in the strong focus by historians on the Corinth camp is the larger political and social frameworks in which it existed. While all of the camps in the Mississippi Valley came into existence, partly as a result of a seemingly unanticipated phenomenon of African Americans seeking refuge behind Union lines, arrival of thousands of blacks in this manner, their displacement set up the perfect situation for the onset of radical, Republican, wartime, military reconstruction. Co-biographer Ethel Osgood Mason, writing with Chaplain John Eaton Jr., General Ulysses S. Grant's, these are my words, civil surrogate in the field, states that it was Grant's clairvoyance that caused him to select the New Hampshire-born educator, Eaton, as superintendent of freedmen in the fall of 1862. As clandestine as, arguably, were and remain Grant's hand in what would take place over the next several years, his motives in choosing Eaton, the chaplains too, have, in my opinion, remained veiled, or at the very least, misunderstood and understudied. Eaton's project, Radical Agricultural Experiments, treated scholarly by only 2 authors in these many, many years, are openly described in his report of his operations. In the report of the General Superintendent of Freedmen, 1865, reporting on activities of 1864, Eaton writes of President's Island, the site of another camp, Camp Dixie, and also the site of the Department of Freedmen. And here is what he says. The supervision hoped to see a large number of Negro planters using their own capital or aided by benevolence of the government. President Island, the Low Memphis, originally occupied at the suggestion of General Grant, was taken away from us in public interest, sacrificed to private. He ends commentary on the President's Island experiment, and I'm sort of resurrecting that term because perhaps you've heard of the Sea Island experiment and the Davis Bend experiment, but nobody talks about the President Island experiment. By stating that per Special Order Number 10, the island has been returned to his control and for his purposes. And then this. All white persons not directly connected with the military service will be required to leave the island before the first day of January 1865. And after that date, no white person will be allowed to land on any part of the same without permission. There can be no denying that the mission of Eaton's Department of Freedmen, specifically operations on President's Island, was to develop a cadre of independent black farmers, in his own words, Negro cultivators. And he says as much in several places that include the report I've referenced, his 1907 memoir, and in correspondence, most nobly with Levi Coffin, reputed president of the Underground Railroad, whom Eaton wrote in March of '63. You are already informed of what we purpose for agriculture. It is trying to think we must undertake it under circumstances so unsatisfactory, when so many advantages could have been added by a word from Washington, especially when it is so necessary to vindicate the declared policy of the government. We confidently look to the friends of the cause to cooperate. 2 months later, Eaton confides to Coffin that his own travels away from Memphis, one assumes spent organizing for the cause, have, Eaton absent, left Grant responsible for the freedmen. Inconveniencing the general, Eaton laments. If the relationship between Grant and Eaton has been masked by other larger aspects of Grant's life, by his war role and by his distance from abolitionist roots of his paternal family, Eaton's reliance and alliance with humane organizations like the American Missionary Association, various freedmen aid societies, and the Western Freedmen's Aid Commission, of which Coffin himself served as general agent in 1863, is clear. These organizations, their machines, funds for teachers and other workers and other types of donations provided an infrastructure for the communities, indeed, the new society Eaton and his friends tried to bring about. And yet it is true as well that Eaton perhaps insisted on labor too much. This is a criticism of Eaton, perhaps to his program's detriment. Not my criticism, but others. Labor was considered virtuous, yes. Requirement of work, too, influenced, perhaps was the main reason, next to unsettled policy on the return of blacks to their masters, why blacks were to be registered in the first place. And not only that, but required to carry certificates documenting their employment. Freed people in Memphis had to navigate the city as well as martial law and Eaton's edicts. Yet in his report he writes that such mandates were no more than what was asked of whites who were within Union lines. I have taken pains to undergird the social climate of wartime Memphis relative to freedmen and relative to the contraband camps there in order to explain to descendants of the Corinth camp that their ancestors who were removed to Memphis experienced in one form or another the spirit of Eaton's social movement. And what of those ancestors? Who were they? For more than 10 years, I've been trying to answer that question by analyzing the Register of Freedmen, the largest contraband camp register yet discovered, containing names of 2,133 freed people. That number migrated from 11 U.S. states and several counties within those states. 21 such persons reported Corinth as their former residence, and another 56 reported Tishomingo as theirs. And cued by Manning's statement concerning droves of blacks who followed the black raiders from Alabama, residents of Corinth camp should also include them. 33 persons from Franklin County, and perhaps Alabama, and perhaps others from border Tennessee counties and nearby Mississippi counties. Some of these migrating blacks may have, as Manning points out, been at other camps before coming to Corinth, at Grand Junction, LaGrange, Bolivar, or Jackson. Beverly Bond and Janan Sherman, writing in Memphis in black and white, state that in March of '63, the Tennessee camps were closed and blacks sent to Camps Fisk and Shiloh, near Fort Pickering and Camp Dixie on President's Island. A year later, blacks at Corinth were sent to Camp Dixie, Bond and Sherman suggest. Manning adds, when the men, women, and children got off of the train in Memphis, they joined thousands of others already displaced. It is uncertain if the Register of Freedmen was created to capture the influx of migrants from other camps. It seems beyond doubt, based on analysis of the Register of Freedmen, that some Corinth free people found their way to Camp Shiloh, which Humphrey Hayes, missionary, describes this way. The contraband camps at the coast of Memphis, 3 in number that she saw, there were actually more, are beautifully located. A deep ravine south of the city separates the fort from Camp Shiloh, and another ravine just below separates Shiloh from Camp Fisk. These are on a high bluff overlooking the Mississippi, and opposite, a little south of this camp, is Camp Dixie on President's Island. Shiloh is a village of log houses And Camp Fisk consists of 3 long rows of cabins, numbering 109, besides quarters for whites and a large church and schoolhouse. The camp on the island at present consists of tents. That is, Camp Dixie at that time consisted of tents. There are clues in the record that help us to date this significant record, the Register of Freedmen. Clue number 1. 3-week-old Zachariah Robinson, whose residence is recorded as Camp Holly Springs, I should say in the Register of Freedmen, name, former residence, former master, lots of other really important information, including age, is one of the last pieces of information. So this is Zachariah Robinson. Zachariah would have had to have been born between May and July of 1864. When he's registered, he is literally 3 weeks old. Most likely the latter, which would mean that the camp was no longer in the process of being moved, but settled. The camp might be, according to Zachariah's age, no older than this baby boy. Camp Shiloh was very importantly not just a freedmen's village, or as Humphrey Hayes referred to it, a contraband village, but a regimental village. Full disclosure, 5 of my own ancestors lived at Camp Shiloh. My paternal second great-grandmother and 4 of her children. I am uncertain whether they spent time in a different camp before coming to Memphis from their own Marshall County, Mississippi master. In addition to Zachariah, who appears alone in the register, 4 other infants ranging in age from 2 to 5 months. Fannie Mitchell, perhaps the child of 19-year-old Margaret Mitchell. Maria Smith, likely the child of Harriet Smith. Callan Barnum, likely the child of Bertha. And then Elvira Campbell, whose parentage is a little less clear than the others, but who appears in the register with 9 other persons who share the surname Campbell. Unlike family members, whose former residence is listed as either Tishomingo or Hardeman County, Elvira's residence is listed as, quote-unquote, at camp. While we cannot be certain in which camp Elvira was born, her age of 2 months suggests either that she was born at a different camp or that Shiloh had been registering new individuals and families throughout the spring and summer of '64. It is also worth noting that families are in the Memphis camps, clearly at Shiloh, reuniting. There is reason to believe that this is the case with the Campbell family, whose members had been, prior to migration to Memphis, split between 2 different counties. Many times in the register, we see family groups in which individuals report different owners than their family members, and sometimes that means they have been living in different counties. So my own work on contraband camp registers is moving to a new level of support. In the next year at the University of Chicago, I will work with other researchers to see how we can make the number of registers that we've discovered connect to related records, such as soldiers' records, pension files, as were mentioned earlier, freedmen's bureau records, and the like. For this talk today, I took only a cursory look at soldiers' records, in this case, soldiers of the 55th, aka the 1st Alabama, to see if I could manually come across matches between persons registered at Shiloh and enlisted men. I'm looking at a very small set, excuse me, actually of soldiers whose surnames began with the letter A or B. I came across 6 interesting cases, 3 of which I will elaborate on. The first, William or David Abernathy, those are 2 separate soldiers, but both with the last name Abernathy, recorded variously with the regular spelling, as most of us would spell it, A-B-E-R-N-A-T-H-Y, but also separate records, Abinatha, A-B-I-N-A-T-H-A. What makes this case especially interesting is that there appear 2 women in the Shiloh Register, the Register of Freedmen, Nancy and Kanina, the first Abnatha, the second Abernathy. While David Abernathy's place of birth is listed as Alabama, the former residence of these two women is listed as Milliken's Bend, Louisiana. We know from other cases that field service at Milliken's Bend resulted, as in so many other areas, in blacks following troops back to Memphis. Point being, even from that far away, African Americans were following the Union Army back to Memphis. It is very possible that this is the case with these two women, who subsequently married David or William and took the name Abernathy. That's theory. The second case is one I will likely further research. It is the case of Alfred Armstead, and I'm hoping in saying that name, someone from either Corinth or Franklin County, Alabama, that will ring a bell. There are in the Shiloh Register 12 persons of the same surname, that is Armstead, all from Franklin County and all former slaves of Franklin Armstead. And then the third and final case is that of Hampton, Jack, and Sampson Box, the latter two born in Madison County, Alabama, and Sullivan County, Tennessee, respectively. There are in the ROF, Register of Freedmen, 6 persons with the name Box, surname Box, all of them from Corinth, all of them former slaves of James Box. And I'm aware that the Corinth campus believed, I think it was the Brent book that I read, where the name Box is given as in the vicinity. So having 6 persons with this name at Camp Shiloh is not therefore surprising. Now, you have heard the good news. Blacks who left Corinth were in many cases beneficiaries of Northern philanthropy, as well as the schemes of radical Republican John Eaton Jr., whose work Grant himself apparently supported. However, I in no way mean to downplay the horrors of war, the destitute condition of freedmen. Jim Downs' 2014 book, Sick from Freedom, offers a credible argument that the word not heard from the government, Eaton's language, resulted in an untold number of deaths, my second great-grandmother among them. In fact, a letter to American Missionary Association President George Whipple, dated January 9, 1864, reads thusly. Since writing you a few days since, we have passed through so trying an ordeal that I must give some brief account of it. I think I mentioned in my last that the people that came from Corinth, about 1,500, now living in tents, and that many of these tents had no chimneys. Stoves are not to be thought of, and therefore no means of warming them, except by making a fire on the ground inside the tents when the smoke becomes almost intolerable. I can scarcely remain inside of such a tent for 5 minutes, and yet many must endure living in such tents or struggle with the cold. The writer continues that the last day of the year, December 31st, 1863, there was a cold wind during the day and a terrible storm that night. The thermometer January 1st stood at 11 degrees. Needless to say, many took ill as a result. The writer speaks later in the letter of frozen feet of 5 freedmen arriving from Mississippi. There are many more stories of misfortune, atrocities, which Downs has suggested is due to the government's negligence. There can be no doubt. But I would end with this. Many more of our ancestors survived the war, the transition to freedom, the journey from Corinth to Memphis, from Jackson and Bolivar, Holly Springs and LaGrange. I mentioned earlier cross-referencing contraband camp registers with related records. The latter would include decennial censuses and agricultural censuses. Studying both for the year 1870 reveals that Camp Dixie, Eaton's vision of a Negro paradise a la Grant, that's actually Grant's language as he references the possibilities or potential of Davis Bend. But I think it was actually realized at President's Island. Hundreds of families transitioned to President's Island after the war. My own ancestor was detailed to assist the final relocation in the spring of '65. Though it seems little more today than an industrial park, it was still decades into the 20th century, a freedmen's village, and it should be remembered as such. Evidence of its existence has not been at all difficult to find. Superintendent at Corinth, John Phillips, who was also here in Corinth working with Chaplain Alexander, followed the people to Memphis, and months after their arrival requested this to Assistant Adjutant of Memphis. I have the honor to request that the land laying adjacent to Camp Shiloh, extending from the Contraband Hospital on the east to the Mississippi River on the west, and from the Contraband Burying Ground on the north to the Soldiers' Graveyard on the south, be assigned to the present season to the Department of Freedmen for agricultural purposes. My dear fellows, what the beautiful experiment that was the Corinth camp did not end in the winter of '63-64. Our ancestors' dreams, some of them, were realized. And it is because of the incredible work that the Corinth community today has done, unmatched, that the American public shall know it. Our ancestors continued their journey west, but we stand today at a digital crossroads, encouraged to tell their stories widely, and the choice to do so is no less critical. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. McLeod, for that excellent presentation on what happened next. We are very excited now to be sharing the videos that are at the core of the augmented reality app. The videos, I'm going to mention several people, and if you're here, if you'll just please stand when I mention your name. The videos were directed by Mike again, along with his assistant Glenn Payne, both alumni of Northeast. George Kehoe, a professional playwright from Oxford, Mississippi, wrote the screenplays. George.
The Boys and Girls Club of Prentice and Boonville provided many of the actors with this video. Without them, we would not be able to have this. They worked all day Saturday and had a major fundraiser that night. They're still able to work with us to do these videos. Will y'all please stand?
And I'm going to let Mrs. Jumper come up here and share something with you for just a minute.
Thank you all for coming this afternoon. It was truly a pleasure, but it has also been a pleasure to have the young mastermind of this project. And he's been a pleasure ever since I met him for us to be a partner with him. And he finally came on board. And he's also one of our board members for the Prentice Boys and Girls Club. And we would like to present to Jeffrey Powell. Thank you for dedication, inspiration, and perseverance toward enhancing the lives of all young people. We are so fortunate to experience your knowledge and expertise. You are truly a blessing to Boonville Prentice Boys and Girls Club. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for everything you do.
In addition to the Boys and Girls Club, who provided most of our actors, we had several actors from Northeast and Corinth communities, including Dr. Bill Stone, Andrea Mathis, Melanie Walker, Jalen Walker, Ann Walker, and Sylvia Taylor. Stand.
Who provided the musical score for the videos. If you're here, please stand.
And we owe a special thanks to Hansford Huff and David Dodds for providing a wagon and oxen for the videos. Are y'all here?
When the app is launched next month, you'll be able to go to the Contraband Camp on 800 North Parkway Street in Corinth and walk around the path of the statues, hold your smartphone up to them, and play a 2 to 3 minute video of each statue.
Today, we have the privilege of previewing those videos. So we ask you that you imagine yourself at the park, hopefully a park that will get cleaned up soon. It's still suffering from the damage from the tropical storm that came through that you heard the mayor mention earlier, but it will soon be cleaned up. And but you'll see on the screen each statue, and the appropriate video will follow. And when we get through with the videos, the Northeast Chorus is going to sing 3 selections that are very appropriate to the story that you have been hearing about today that is told in the videos. And then faculty members Brian Mitchell and Dr. Amanda Maddox will close our program. Through this music, I challenge you to reflect on those men, women, and children who took control of their lives by making the dangerous trek to Corinth and then found ways, on and off the battlefield, to contribute to the fight for greater equality in America.
From the fall of 1862 until the winter of 1863, the Contraband Camp at Corinth was a tangible destination of freedom for thousands of slaves who fled the farms and plantations of Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi, escaping their places of bondage with whatever they could take with them in a hurry. The term contraband was the legal device Union General Benjamin Butler used in May 1861, barely 1 month after the Civil War's first shots rang out at Fort Sumter, to protect slaves who escaped from their owners and reached Fort Monroe in Virginia. Before the Emancipation Proclamation took effect on January 1, 1863, slaves were considered property in the eyes of the United States government, and early in the war, slave owners often demanded the return of their escaped property, citing the federal fugitive slave law, which was not repealed until June 1864. Butler justified his new policy, a policy born of necessity, by categorizing escaped slaves as war contraband, that is, goods and materials that could benefit the war effort of an enemy. The policy spread as Union armies began moving further and more widely into southern states, and the term endured throughout the war years, during which nearly 500,000 slaves found refuge in the many contraband camps that arose near Union military encampments. Conditions in these camps varied significantly, and by the spring of 1863, Corinth was considered the model camp in the Western theater of the war. The bold move toward freedom by an increasing number of Southern slaves to risk everything in seeking protection behind Union lines helped to force the issue of emancipation. Undoubtedly, in the balance of the war's outcome lay the answer to the question of whether slavery had any part in American society. slaves began to arrive. After Confederate forces attempted to reclaim the town and its vital railroad junction with an attack in early October and were defeated into retreat, Corinth was even more securely in Union hands, and refugees began arriving in larger numbers. Just 2 weeks earlier in mid-September, President Lincoln had announced the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. In November, the Cincinnati Daily Gazette reported that when a group of 20 newly arrived refugees were asked if they knew about the proclamation, they answered they did not, but said they did know that freedom could be found in the promised land of Corinth. Men, women, and children fleeing the fields of oppression came by any means possible, and they came from everywhere. Union General Grenville Dodge, commander of the Corinth district, was not ready for what he saw. When my command returned to Corinth, it seemed as though every Negro in that broad and fertile Tennessee Valley followed us. They came with their families loaded in all kinds of vehicles they took from their masters: coaches, carriages, farm wagons, with mules, oxen, and cows hitched to them. They were the most motley and picturesque crowd I ever saw, and it was estimated there were over 2,000. They made a column 2 miles long, and I was at my wit's end what to do with them. General Dodge assigned James Alexander, chaplain of the 66th Illinois Regiment, to address the immediate challenges of providing food, housing, clothing, and medical attention for incoming refugees. Initially, the Army provided rations and tents, and benevolent organizations in the North began sending clothing and other material support. The spring of 1863 was a rainy one, and rivers and creeks were running high. So were the chances of death from exposure and illness. But free people kept coming, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation became official in January of that year. Most refugees arrived in camp with a little more than what they wore, but most also arrived with a strong work ethic and sternly tested spirituality, a powerful combination that carried them into the early exercises in freedom. President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation did not so much grant freedom to slaves as to open a path toward shaping the freedmen's inherent and inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. For many, the journey on that path began in the contraband camp. Situated on a productive farm owned by Mary Phillips and confiscated by the Union Army, the contraband camp started as a tent city but quickly evolved into a largely self-sustaining community. Refugees began felling trees, splitting logs, and building cabins, not at the beck and call of a whip, but with a desire to create homes of their own. During the summer of 1863, more than 17 new structures were erected. They built a schoolhouse and a church, a hospital, and a commissary. They laid out streets named after Union officers, conducted regular morning sweep-outs to maintain sanitation, and amid the horrors of war, worked out a routine of deliverance. The American Missionary Association, an abolitionist society in New York, sent missionaries to teach, preach, and help with medical aid. Reverend Edward Pierce, a preacher-teacher who arrived in March 1863 to supervise the AMA school, called Corinth the most thoroughly systematized, cleanest, and most healthy camp I have ever seen. The camp's population fluctuated throughout its 15-month existence, reaching 6,000 at its peak, and the constant influx of new arrivals made camp management difficult. Some refugees were transferred to contraband camps at Cairo, Illinois, via Memphis and up the Mississippi River. And when the Army began officially recruiting freedmen in the spring of 1863, the male population of the camp fell sharply, with nearly every able-bodied freedman enlisted. By December 1863, Union forces controlled enough railroad track to diminish the importance of the Corinth Junction. Consequently, military operations moved in other directions, and General William T. Sherman ordered the Corinth camp closed, and the residents moved to Memphis. When the last Union troops pulled out, they burned the camp to the ground, so it could not benefit any Confederates who might return. Freed people in Corinth began working at an array of jobs as soon as they arrived in camp. The Army employed many as laborers to repair railroads, refurbish fortifications, and provide other services that supported the Union war effort, work for which they were paid, although not always in a timely manner. A key reason the camp took on a productive routine is the variety of skills the refugees collectively brought with them. The kind of skills that could establish and sustain a community. In March 1863, the camp superintendent reported that Corinth was home to 3,657 freedmen, 658 men, 1,440 women, and 1,559 children. Among them were 48 carpenters, 36 blacksmiths, 800 cooks, 159 laundresses, 80 seamstresses, and 180 teamsters. There were 900 cases of illness, 89 deaths, and 45 births. Life in the camp was never without hardship, and the freed men quickly recognized that whatever benefited the Union Army benefited themselves as well. Interaction with Union soldiers was the freedmen's first real engagement with the federal government, and both were deeply impacted by the realities of the new relationship. Not all who wore the uniform of a Union soldier liked the idea. General Stephen Herbert believed the contraband camps were a mere excuse for misplaced charity, but others, including Generals Grant and Dodge, recognized the moral imperative as well as the practical benefits. Grant said that taking freedmen away from Confederate hands aided the Union war effort as much as capturing Confederate soldiers. Union troops began conducting raids into North Alabama to disrupt Confederate supply lines and, before long, to liberate slaves. As one observer noted, a cavalry raid went out this morning which would break the chains of the captive and bring him into our lines of free men. For their part, freed men were more than ready to serve and sacrifice in whatever way they could for liberty and citizenship. Living intimately with the land, close to the ebb and flow of the seasons, with their daily lives and their work directly engaged with the nuances of the natural world. In the fall of 1862, refugees harvested nearby cotton fields confiscated by Union troops, and by May 1863, the U.S. government was profiting between $4,000 and $5,000 from the agricultural production at the camp, and refugees were earning wages with skills they had learned in bondage. They also aided Union troops by harvesting existing corn crops to supplement bland Army rations. A newspaper account observed that cornfields planted last spring for the benefit of the Southern Confederacy are strangely diverted from that use. Around Corinth, there soon was a space of 25 miles in diameter on which there was not enough corn left to subsist even the few inhabitants that remained. In the spring of 1863, using seeds and tools supplied by Northern Aid organizations, freedmen launched a successful cooperative program on the Phillips farm that produced 300 acres of cotton for the Army and 100 acres of vegetables for sale to soldiers and on the open market. Crops included sweet potatoes, tomatoes, cabbages, cucumbers, sweet corn, peas, beans, beets, and radishes, all of which enhance the monotonous Army rations of hardtack, cornmeal, and salt beef. For the refugees, freedom was not yet in full bloom, but there were buds on the vine. particularly diabolical element of slavery's oppression was the outright denial by law of any formal education for those in bondage. Refugees reaching the contraband camp were eager to learn. By the time the American Missionary Association sent teachers to Corinth, freed men had built a two-room schoolhouse and sought reading instruction from those among themselves who already could read and from sympathetic soldiers. But even when the teachers arrived, circumstances for consistent lessons were not easy. Instruction was often interrupted when the schoolhouse was needed to shelter newly arrived refugees, and the sultry climate made spring, summer, and early fall afternoons unbearably hot for teachers and pupils alike. Even so, the school played an important role in spreading the ability to read among the freed men. Reverend Edward Pierce, supervisor of the school, reported, "It is impossible to tell how rapidly these children learn. We are surprised ourselves. We can actually see a difference from day to day. We find them every hour of daylight in their books. We cannot enter a cabin or tent, but that we see from 1 to 3 with books. I visited a cabin one night, 9:30, and found the boy studying with iron chips for a light, and thus he had been for over an hour. As soon as the children were taught, they became teachers at home. A night school opened for adults who were working during the day, and by the end of 1863, more than 1,000 freedmen had learned to read in the AMA school. The missionary teachers used Bible stories and passages for instruction and enlightenment. Isaiah was a favorite text. "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners." Isaiah 61:1. For many, after suffering the tortures of slavery and now living through the uncertainties of war, a touch of heaven had come to earth. Army chaplains and volunteer teacher preachers, in large part, were responsible for overseeing camp operations. Army Chaplain James Alexander was the first superintendent of the Corinth camp, and he was an enthusiastic and dedicated catalyst for much progress. He was instrumental in directing northern aid to Corinth and in raising a company of refugee soldiers who by February 1863 assumed the active duty of guarding the camp, thus relieving regular Union troops of the responsibility. Later that year, when the Union Army began recruiting freedmen in earnest, Alexander resigned as camp superintendent and became colonel of the 1st Alabama Infantry of African descent, a 1,000-man regiment fully recruited in Corinth. Significant northern aid came in the form of religious men and women who volunteered their services through the American Missionary Association. Of course, the freed people had their own preachers too, and a palpable spiritual faith pervaded the camp's residents. The AMA's Reverend George North Carruthers wrote, "Their confidence in God is unbounded, and their simple faith refreshing. We find examples of talent, faith, and zeal among their preachers that would edify any Christian pulpit. I would not be understood to give the idea that we have no degradation. Slavery has done its work well in Mississippi and Alabama, but many have come through the great tribulation, a rebuke to many who have enjoyed the privileges of a Christian education." Along with institutionalized slavery suppression of education was its atrocious disregard for family unity. Not only were their families torn apart and separated by slave traders and bills of sale, but marriage was forbidden among those in bondage. In Corinth, love and marriage reunited. In November 1862, the Cincinnati Daily Gazette reported that when a refugee couple asked a chaplain to marry them, to join the hands of two whose hearts were already one, the chaplain was surprised to discover that many under his care had been living together as man and wife without any formal ceremony of marriage. He quickly determined to make the next Sabbath day a grand conjugal day, and he proposed to marry all who laid claims to having been informally married heretofore. It would, he said, be the wedding day of their recollection. When that next Sabbath came, 30 30 couples solemnized their union in one grand ceremony. In May 1863, freedmen preachers joined together with army chaplains and missionaries to formalize their own church at Corinth, preferring a union church rather than a denominational one. One of the founding preachers described it. 1 week ago last Saturday, we organized a church here. Not a congregational, or a Presbyterian, or a Methodist, or a Baptist church, but we call it the Union Christian Church of Corinth. Nearly 100 thus entered into covenant and sat down to the communion of the Lord's Supper. Subsequent prayer meetings were frequent, and on pleasant evenings, upwards of 500 people attended. May 1863 to recruit freedmen into the U.S. Army. The contraband camp had already raised close to a full regiment. Lorenzo's visit signified the Army's new policy of enlisting freedmen, and most men who were able joined up. The uniform that when they arrived symbolized freedom was now the uniform they were wearing. In June of 1863, the 1st Alabama Infantry of African descent was presented the national colors by Colonel Moses Bain of the 50th Illinois. He addressed the regiment and delivered the flag at a ceremony in Corinth. The Cincinnati Daily Gazette reported that the flag was borne to its place in the battalion, which received it with presented arms, and the 1st Alabama became entrusted with keeping our country's honor. Rufus Campbell, the regiment's color bearer, made a speech as well, saying, "Having felt through a long life the evils of slavery, I rejoice at the opportunity of rescuing my children from such a fate. There's not much blood in a man anyhow, and if he's not willing to give it for the freedom of his children and friends, he does not deserve to be called a man." A fellow soldier in the regiment, Corporal Sullivan, spoke about the adherence to the Stars and Stripes, saying, "We today, for the first time, have had given to us the stars, but many of us have received stripes before." James Alexander, now colonel in the new regiment, said that he was willing to die after the triumphs he had that day seen. Reverend Edward Pierce, who had been supervisor of the AMA school, signed on as chaplain of the regiment. The 1st Alabama performed sentinel duty at outposts along the rail lines, joined in countryside raids to disrupt Confederate supply lines, and by summer's end, 1863, manned Battery Robinette and Battery Phillips, key positions in Corinth's fortifications. A 2nd regiment of freedmen began forming, and when Union forces abandoned Corinth in December 1863, nearly 2,000 U.S. soldiers had been recruited here. By the end of the war, 200,000 freed men served as soldiers and sailors in the U.S. Army and Navy. Their service helped lay the groundwork for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution, which collectively not only outlawed slavery, but enshrined freedmen's right to citizenship with equal protection under the law and the right to vote.
I'd like to thank you for inviting our students to be part of this wonderful program. I'd like to thank the students for giving a good part of their Saturday to join us today. We'll be singing 3 selections. The first one, Lono Fatsa. It's a South African praise song. The text means praise the Father, praise everyone. And it's also a children's song of 9 syllables. It can symbolize the joy of these freedmen as they come to the contraband camp. The second piece, No Time, is written as a Christian song for the story of those on earth waiting to get to heaven. It's no time to tarry here because I wait for the angels to sing. So I think the second verse especially could be used as a model for the freedmen coming to Corinth. It's, come, brothers and sisters, there's no time to tarry because I'm on my journey home. We believe the journey home was in Corinth, which prepared them for a home after the war. So I think it's a very emotional and appropriate setting that you'll enjoy. Our last piece is Be the Change. This is obviously a day to celebrate those who gave their lives to change the lives of so very many of these folks who needed help. And we will sing Be the Change you want to see in the world, and the change will come to you. At the end of our selection, I'll turn and ask you to join in the last verse. We'll sing it several times so you can sort of get it in your ears, and we would like to end our part of the program as you join us. We celebrate the change that these people made, and we hope that these young people and that you and I and all of us will be the change to change our generation, to be the change to help others less fortunate than ourselves. Thank you.
Non lo faccia io, se tu non lo faccia io, se tu io non lo faccia io.
Once again, I would like to thank the Northeast Chorus and other Northeast musicians for joining us today in this program. I want to thank each of you for being here and being part of the change. Thank you very much.